not, Peter can add anything relevant. But actually, we have witnessed for more than 5 years now a decrease in democracy and rule of law in Poland. And in two perspectives, the Commission has become more active, so to say. One is this week, where actually they wrote a letter to the Polish government saying that they might start a lawsuit in front of the European Court of Justice concerning the LGBTI-free zones. They have already asked for more information why they have done this and why they found it legally justified to do so, and they have not got sufficient response. So this might, in the end, it will take some time, but might in the end lead to a procedure in front of the European Court of Justice. And we have seen some developments also on the judicial side with the Polish, starting actually with the European Court of Justice saying that that Poland has to abolish the disciplinary chambers. These are specified chambers in the judicial system that are meant to sanction judges and prosecutors, which of course is not in line with the independence of the judiciary. And just an hour later, the Polish Constitutional Court issued that Poland is not bound to follow such decisions by the European Court of Justice. So we see that actually the Polish government is moving away from the common ground of we have European law and everybody is supposed to apply it in the same way. Now, you might not all be lawyers as I am, so I hope I managed to bring across how fundamental this is, because if you do not agree on the same legal ground, if you interpret things in different ways, for example, the protection of your data or the protection of your fundamental rights, if you're being accused in front of a court or things like that, then actually the European Union cannot work just very substantially. So this is a very, very dangerous development. The Polish Constitutional Court has announced to come up with another decision on the 3rd of August, which will be even more broad. And it might be that on the 3rd of August, we have to say we can't work with Poland anymore if we do not have common legal ground.
And Peter, what about the reaction of civil society to this week's developments?
Well, as you might be aware, civil society has been kind of, the backbone of how do you ensure holding power to account in times and places such as in Poland, where the power has been corrupted, I would say, or abused in many senses. The example of the judicial reform that Poland has initiated a while ago is only one example of that. And it's been the Polish society, and especially civil society and individual activists, be it LGBTI activists, be it feminist groups, who have been at the forefront of, putting attention internationally to what's happening in their own country, sometimes and often to the detriment of their own safety and security. So even a couple of months ago, more than 200 civil society organizations, both in Poland and from 19 other European countries, have sent a letter to the then Portuguese presidency of the Council of the EU, expressing deep concern over the deteriorating situation. And they were the ones actually calling on the EU to address the breaches of the rule of law, violations of women's rights, and the right to peaceful process, just as some of the difficulties that the civil society is facing in Poland today. So that letter went in detail about the erosion of judicial independence that Katarina mentioned, intimidation of independent judges, how women's lives have been endangered due to the denial of their sexual and reproductive care, and then the LGBTI-free zones that have been mentioned already. So it's a plethora of topics, but all put together, you see that there's a basic fundamental problem where a country such as Poland, as a valued member of the EU and that has benefited a lot from the EU, is based on their latest political choices that were very narrow. It's not that they have a double majority, took some decisions that are affecting the lives of everyone. And when those citizens of their own country don't have the access to protection and be able to secure those freedoms nationally, obviously they will go to the EU as another level where they can and should be able to do so, to reclaim their rights as EU citizens. And I think that's where the EU has a particular role to play, to ensure that we are all treated equally, regardless of where we are within the Union.
May I just add one particular detail that will make it much more difficult for civil society? It is that this judicial reform, that now the Polish government is saying the let's say normal judges that they do not have under control completely yet, they shall not be allowed to submit cases to the European Court of Justice. So this, up to now, was still an escape from this completely biased judicial system in the higher levels. That you still have some judges who think independently and who really follow the rule of law and who say, this violates European values, European law, and submitted cases to the European Court of Justice. And now the Polish government is saying you are not allowed to do that as a judge, which is against European law fundamentally. I mean, it's one of the principles in Europe that every judge, as soon as as he or she sees a conflict with European law, is allowed and even obliged to say, hey, European Court of Justice, what do you think? Is this in line with the European law or not? So what they are actually doing is cutting off everyone who has complaints against what they are doing to reach this kind of safeguard of the European judges. And the only ones who are still allowed to do so are the higher Polish judges. And they, of course, have all been put into place by the government and are absolutely, loyal is too positive word to call it. They're being used as instruments by the government. So this is really dramatic for the whole of the Polish society.
And obviously, I mean, as you've alluded to, none of this has happened overnight, and it's also not just limited to one country. Very basic values in Europe have come under attack. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, Katarina, about the development since you were a minister a few years ago and to today's picture across Europe.
Well, yes. When I was a minister in Germany, a justice minister, I actually traveled to Warsaw with the complete German government, and we all met our counterparts. So I also met the Polish justice minister, and we had a very long conversation. And of course, we didn't reach common ground, but I still believe, to say this right here, I still believe that we have to talk. Commission president is always about dialogue. Yes, we have to stay in constant contact. But if this contact and this dialogue does not lead to anything, if they keep violating European law systematically, then we have to take other measures. And this is the case in Poland. There it is, especially the independence of the judiciary. They started with that, and it's the most flagrant violation. I would say the situation is even more disturbing in Hungary, because there Viktor Orban has been in power for longer, since 2010, and he has really made Hungary he calls it illiberal democracy. I would call it an autocracy. It's not a democracy anymore, because there is practically no free media left. The media in Hungary is being brought under control of a foundation, which is called KESMA. More than 500 different forms of media are in this foundation, and it's being controlled by his party. So you don't hear or see any real criticism towards Orban, and you don't hear or see opposition either, or critical civil society. He has changed election laws. He has of course, abolished the independence of the judiciary. He is interfering with the freedom of science, with the freedom of education. Everything is being streamlined to keep him in power, and of course, he's corrupt as hell. I mean, he's just the corruptest prime minister that we have in the European Union. So Hungary is really, I think, the worst example that we have, and you see that it is infectious. If we don't act, if you don't act severely, then it will go on. Now it's Slovenia, the next candidate. Yes, so we have to become more vocal, more active, and the Commission has to, in the first place.
And Peter, what about the treatment of civil society in recent years across Europe?
So let me just take a step back and say, the last 10 years overview in terms of what we have witnessed, what we have lived on, like some general trends that we notice, like if you look at it historical perspective, you see that the 2010s are now characterized by a significant backsliding of democracy and the rule of law in general, all over the world, but particularly in Europe. We have a resurgent far-right populism, we have nativist politics, we have new religious rights alliances that we were not aware of before or not as prominent, and we have authoritarianism spreading, and human rights and global governance frameworks that we used to believe in are under either increasing strain in democratic states as well as the liberal ones, or just the whole universality of rights is being questioned, right? So the whole post-war consensus is put under pressure, and now it's kind of like a wild, wild west in a way, a free-for-all. Everything is under question, everything is under attack. Even the basis of the rule of law as we knew it, in terms of the values that we created the European Union for, and what we believed, what we have promoted, what civil society stands for and stood for, is all kind of out there and under attack. And what for me has been noticeable, that we have been very complacent at the European level, and in the so-called West, we were constantly saying, yeah, Russia and Turkey and other places are limiting freedoms, civic freedoms. And then Poland and Hungary happened, and we were still continuously kind of like, yeah, but that's the former East, they don't really understand, they don't really get democracy. I would mention France, I would mention Spain, I would mention Italy, I would mention Greece, I would mention Denmark, I would mention the UK. I would even dare to mention Germany and their approach to the charity law, and how all these different elements, of course, very diverging degree of the conversation. But we have a situation in which we have ongoing conversations everywhere about who and what can be done in a political realm. So who am I as a citizen that can be active and defend my rights, either as a gay person or as a black person or whatever? How can I revindicate my rights? And if I organize in a way to defend myself or promote certain work, then I'm being punished and presented as a foreign agent, as a disturber. And that's what happened to civil society across the EU. We stopped funding civil society to the extent that we used to. We stopped funding citizens' education. We stopped funding human rights. Now we are going back to that. And the EU is trying to kind of, noticing things. And since 2019-20, there are conversations that Katarina is aware of in the parliament to rectify that. But we have been, as I was negotiating the new Erasmus program back in 2013 with the Commission, and the focus was, the only thing we care about is that youth is employable and develops skills. What we cared about as young people and their representatives was to have active citizens who can think for themselves. So I think we have these processes that were going on for a while, that now we see the negative impact of that. We don't have critical thinking allowed in Hungary and Poland. We still have a lot of brave individuals who do that, and we need to focus on where we can support those, be it in a legal framework or simply pushing for the civil society to have access to flexible funding and be able to do the work that they believe in. And I think that's fundamental.
And if we're talking about what the EU can do, what tools does the EU have, and what's missing from the EU's toolbox to protect the rule of law? Katarina?
Well, I think referring to what Peter just said, I think you have to bear in mind how the European Union developed as a whole. It was, in the beginning, very much perceived as as an entirely economic sphere. And I mean, being a social democrat, this has been our kind of point of pressure all the time, that the social aspects, for example, have not been regarded in the same way as the economic ones. So it was only about having this common market and having, you know, exchange of goods and services, etc., etc. So I think we have to see it that way, that the European Union is a constant work in progress, and when it comes to social rights, which are very close to my and our heart, it's that we really have to work for this to get included. And I think what you mentioned about Erasmus goes a bit in the same direction. It was only about us being fit for the market, and we have to broaden this, but it's hard work. And I think this is now also what we have to do now when it comes to rule of law and democracy, because up to a few years ago, the approach was more or less, well, everybody can do whatever they want as long as we can have a common market. And we're now seeing that this doesn't work if you let it go, if you just let, as I said in the very beginning, if you leave the basis of the fundamental values, our common ground, you cannot even have a common market, but you of course cannot have a European Union as we all desire it to be at the meanwhile. So what can we do? Well, we have introduced, we used to have only two weapons, so to say. We had the European Court of Justice, which is still there and which is extremely important in this fight. And the second is the so-called Article 7 procedure, which is a formal procedure that can lead to the exclusion when it comes to your votes. So you're not allowed to have a say anymore in the decisions of the European Union. Problem there is, for the Article 7 procedure, you need unanimity in the end. So Poland will give Hungary the veto, and Hungary will give Poland the veto. So it won't lead anywhere. We have been waiting too long, obviously. So last year we introduced two new measures. One is the monitoring of the rule of law in every member state. Peter mentioned that we have issues in every single member state, every single one. There is no perfect state, and I would think there's probably no perfect state in the world. So it's very important to point out where the issues are, but also to kind of make a comparison where you have, you know, things that are going wrong, things that have changed and have to be adjusted, or where you have, like in the case of Poland and Hungary, governments who were on purpose destroying something, and not only destroy democracy and rule of law in their own country, but also want to destroy it in the whole of the European Union. So you can actually see and measure a bit how things are going. And the second one is the so-called rule of law mechanism, where we created, it was the Parliament who pushed for it, created the possibility to actually sanction member states financially if they breach the rule of law systemically. But the Commission is very reluctant to apply it, and we might even sue the Commission for a failure to act, because we think it's a scandal that they're just sitting there and watching, although they have this tool in their hands since the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say, you know, Europe was or still is at risk of losing its normative authority and pride of being a role model for advancing rights and democracy, solidarity and civic engagement for decades. I mean, the whole EU enlargement process helped a lot of us in that respect to kind of improve or, you know, give the space to citizens to develop in a new direction. And now there's a retraction of that. So I welcome the Parliament's initiative to, you know, to counter that and to oblige the Commission to really use the tools that they have at their disposal. And we know that the rule of law mechanism is far from imperfect at the moment still. And the way the reports are done, there's a lot to be desired, but it's a big step in the right direction. So we need to remain vigilant. And that's the role of civil society. It's really to remain vigilant and hold power to account and help the politicians we have elected to represent us to make sure that these things, that the wrongdoing is not there anymore, and we improve the situation for the people on the ground.
May I just add, what we also have is, of course, the funding that Peter mentioned before. And if we have a look, for example, at the Rights and Values program, that has been significantly is significantly higher. I think it has been tripled. I'm not completely sure there, but it really increased very, very, very largely. And with that, we are able to support civil society that works for rights and values, as the name indicates. So, and with Erasmus, we were less successful. It has been it has increased, but I think we have to keep an eye on this. That we really want not only to fund things that help economically, but that bring us an increase in values. And maybe I would like to add that the Conference on the Future of Europe itself, hopefully, is an exercise that will bring more awareness, more discussion, more life into this Europe of democracy.
And just to go back to the funding of civil society, maybe Peter, in a minute, you can explain some positive stories that have come out of civil society in terms of their contribution to the debate. And then also, Katarina, you mentioned about dialogue a few minutes ago and the importance of that. So we saw the Polish Prime Minister come to meet with the Commission President this week. And as a group, we called for her to raise the issue of rule of law. I mean, I guess these conversations are difficult. I mean, they're not easy conversations to have, but maybe your experience as a Justice Minister, you can say a few words of that.
Should I go first, or should Katarina go first, as you wish?
Peter, you can start.
Right. So I think the most important thing of what the value of civil society is, and the NGOs and the activism, is not what they're funded for, is what they do without having any money. And that's just, people, regular people just organizing and showing solidarity, be it with migrants that are coming or refugees that are coming across seas, be it organizing yourself to, when you live in Poland in an LGBTI-free zone, how do you counteract that? You just come together and, you try to do something and you show solidarity with your peers. But there are also examples of when, from my home country, Slovenia, as Katarina mentioned, is the next one on the illiberal tendency very much. We just had on Sunday a referendum on the quality of the drinking water, because the government has changed the law in a way that would have endangered the sources of drinking water. And it was the civil society who organized it. It was individuals who went out into the street and gathered the 40,000 signatures needed in the Slovenian constitutional order to call for a referendum with which you can then deny the law that was approved by the parliament. That was a big undertaking. I mean, in a country of 2 million, to gather 40,000 certified signatures in person during times of pandemic is no small feat. And that was done by the civil society, working across movements, from women's rights organizations to your grandma, who was standing there, and going to taxi drivers who were volunteering to bring people from their retirement homes to the voting pools. I mean, a whole plethora of different solidarity examples. And they won with a resounding 87% against the law or in favor of the topic. So that shows to me that citizens is well alive and activism is well alive across Europe, but also that both the EU and those of us who are working in funding, like myself as a grant maker, need to recognize that and support that with very flexible and not tedious mechanisms that they can sustain that work going forward, and see it as the part of the pillar of society and oversight. It's not just the media and the politicians and the judicial. It's also the kind of importance of the citizens having the power.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we really should also trust the civil society and the population. I mean, we should not make the mistake to confuse the governments with the people. We have illiberal governments, but especially, I would say, especially for Poland, this has always been a country and people who who fought for their liberty all their history long. So I have trust that that in the end democracy and rule of law will win. But if you ask for the dialogue, well, yes, I've had meetings with my colleagues from Poland, from Hungary, also from Turkey, and these conversations usually are very, very polite. They are usually not with media in the room, so you can actually exchange. But they're also quite different because you have different kinds of politicians. I mean, you have the ones who really believe in what they're doing, even if we and I believe that it's completely wrong from the very beginning. It's a completely wrong approach, but they believe it. So with these, you can actually discuss, and you will be quite startled, quite confused sometimes, as I was in Warsaw. But they knew perfectly well that, for example, the German law. So that's what the Polish politicians keep saying. You are doing more or less the same thing in Germany, in France, in Spain. But of course, what they are doing is they're collecting little items from all over the world, probably, but at least all over Europe, putting them together. And it's also about checks and balances. So if you take, if you only take the controlling parts and eliminate the balances, then the result is a different one. So but then you have people. I think Viktor Orban is very much more someone who is I think he knows very well what he's doing, and he's much more a cold-blooded, just a power politician. Who wants power and who wants money, as I said, corrupt as hell. So that is a completely different approach, and yeah. So it's exciting. It doesn't lead anywhere in either cases because you just simply do not agree at the very start. But you have to keep it up because things change, majorities change. In Slovenia, it's very fragile, the majorities. So there's always hope.
And we're coming to the end of our discussion, but talking of exchanges, you recently had an exchange in the Parliament, a brief exchange with the incoming Slovenian presidency, who's now chairing the presidency of the Council. What are your expectations for the next 6 months?
Well, actually, I was very disappointed. I had heard from Slovenia that he was rhetorically so good, such a demagogue. I thought his speech was quite a bore. Well, we had an experience with him before in the Rule of Law Monitoring Group, where he actually, when we confronted him and we actually asked questions that he didn't like, he just disconnected. And he still refuses to answer our questions unless we, on our channel, show his propaganda videos. It's really kind of weird. So I just hope that he doesn't do too much damage. I mean, you have to see that he is not the president of the council. We have Charles Michel for that, but the ministers are presidents in the council. It's a bit complicated. It's different institutions. So they actually are the ones who can do harm. But I hope, as it is a coalition that is very diverse, maybe Peter can elaborate just a little bit on that with respect to the time. But I would be very interested if you think that the ministers can actually, if they're some like this and some like that. We just had exchange with Slovakia yesterday, and there it is very much like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't keep my hopes up, unfortunately, because this is a very illiberal government. It's a government of convenience, of relatively corrupt and power-hungry politicians who are there knowing that if there's elections, most of them will no longer feature in the new parliament. So I see a difficulty there on anything, and I would agree. I just hope that they won't do too much damage. But if you see how Orban praises Janša and what the damages he's trying to do, basically it's Janša's Trumpist style of just, shooting venom on all sides against everyone who says anything against him or anything like it. So it was a wake-up call for them that they lost heavily a referendum. So we'll see. They actually, now it's ongoing situation. They don't have a majority in the parliament. They rely on the so-called opposition that is not the progressive one to vote them in and vote law by law. But I think, there will be another potential vote of no confidence and potential attempt to get rid of the current government during the presidency, as we had examples of that during the Finnish presidency. So it's not an unprecedented situation. If not, we will just have to weather the storm for the next 6 months and then have elections as soon as possible to clarify the situation, because it's not sustainable and our president is not helping by protecting the current prime minister.
And just before we finish, we could obviously talk for hours on the rule of law, it seems. But so this is about the future of Europe, and it's also about listening to people. And we've got this debating platform where we've taken some ideas. So just very briefly, I want your reaction to a few ideas that have been submitted. So we asked people, how can we ensure a free and diverse media? And Jean-Michel said, create a fund allowing independent media to operate without relying on other sources of funding. What do you think of that idea? Katerina?
Well, actually, part of this Rights and Values program, and if I'm well aware, it's also other programs, are dedicated to journalism, to free media. It's a thin line, of course, because we cannot say for us free media is the media that it attacks a certain government. So this is a very thin line, but there are fundings for not for specific media, but for building up structures. For example, journalist associations, but maybe Peter knows more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the grandmaker in me is aware of, and people outside don't know how this necessarily works. It's all, the devil is always in the detail. But the fact that if you give money to endorse something, it doesn't mean that you tell them what to do. And that's the basic principle that we have as grandmakers. We give you the money because we believe in what you are trying to do, not because of what we want you to do. And that's a fundamental difference. And I think that needs to be the guiding principle for any kind of funding for media going forward, be it public or private, is just to trust, evaluate based on what they're trying to do, the audiences they cater for, and ensure that there's diversity and pluralism of voices. That's the key. But even when the EU does give the emergency funding, like to the Slovenian press agency that happened a couple of weeks ago, the money still didn't reach them. The government still refuses to come to do it, and there's still employees don't get their salaries for a couple of months. So it's still an ongoing situation. Even when we think from a media perspective, oh, it was done and dusted, in practice, they still didn't get the money and the employees are wary for their livelihood. So, even when you do have funding, you need to create mechanisms that are quick to get the money out of the door, as we say.
And then finally, and you can say some closing words as well. We also asked, how do you think the EU should respond to attacks on democracy? And Wanda said, applying sanctions is the first step, but they must be directed to the government and not to the citizens. That's an important point, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it was one of the fundamental points also for Parliament. Also, this has proven to be difficult to do in reality. So in the end, what we managed to get in this whole big compromise was that we have like a platform where so we have the obligation of the government still to finance the program, even if the government does not receive the European funding. So that only concerns the government and not the partner. And that if the partner does not receive the money, like the example that Peter just mentioned, then there is the possibility to notify that towards the European Commission. But of course, it is difficult. We cannot, by law, kind of give it directly. Then we can't. We have to make sure that the government does its duty, and that's what we're trying to do. And if it doesn't, then we of course have another way to sanction them. I don't know if that is satisfying for the civil society. I would be pleased to hear.
Well, it as you said, it is complex and it's complicated. We understand the restrictions on public funding and the scrutiny that the EU funding is under in particular. But I would just, as a active citizen, as a European citizen, I think for me and for all others, it's very important that you can if your own national level fails or regional level fails, you have the EU level, and you're still an EU citizen, and hence you live in and I'm a true believer in the union of citizens. So you need to have a mechanism where this can be possible, that you get access to that, either funding or simply, somebody will take care of your rights and protect them. I think that's a very important message to all the citizens out there, that going forward, we need to shape our laws within the community in a way that an individual citizen, and that is always going to be a majority versus the minority versus the majority, can access to that, because I think our democracy litmus test is how we treat our minorities. So it's not about specific treatment or special treatment for our European Muslims or our LGBTI people. It's really about, if you are none of that and you live in your big environment, in your white majority environment, obviously you're not affected because you don't understand that reality. But it's for those that are the outliers in a context, they need to be protected. And that's what we need to fight for, all of us together, right? And then if mechanisms who are existing don't work, we need to find better ones, including a better cooperation between private philanthropy and public funding, because, going in it together, like the Norway grants and the European Economic Area grants they do, that's a way of overcoming those obstacles that maybe EU public funding faces. So there are models that could be explored.
And yeah, just to close this debate, Katarina, for you, obviously the Parliament's going to be very active in the conference in the future of Europe. Maybe you want to say a few words about what's going to happen in the coming months.
Well, we're looking very much forward to the next plenary session, because it will finally be with citizens. We have been waiting for this. We had the first plenary, which was not a plenary because there were only one citizen per country. I thought this was quite a spooky meeting, or well, I found it a bit bizarre. So yes, what we really want to do is now get in contact with these 800 citizens that are going to be chosen. The process is ongoing. But then, of course, with all the input that we receive via the digital platforms, we have the digital platform of the conference itself. We have the digital platform of the S&D group. So we're actually like racehorses, waiting for the start. And I think also we as a group should think of how to connect the best possible with citizens to really have an input. In the end, we are still a representative democracy, and in the end, it will be the usual institutions that have to decide. But the more people we get in, the bigger the pressure will be for these proposals to be finalized by the institutions. So this is really our task at the moment, and I'm looking forward to it.
And as a group, we're also looking forward to receiving many more ideas and input from people across Europe on the platform, on the social media channels, as well as what's happening in the plenary sessions. So thank you, Katarina, and thank you, Peter, for your time today. Obviously, we could talk for hours and hours, but the half an hour has been and gone. So thanks everyone also for following the debate online.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Danke. Ciao.